Good morning. Okay, we're going to start Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. That's 37a. Thank Hashem. Okay, we'll learn Torah every day. Supposed to be learning. We should have this Mikdash immediately. So it starts like this. Someone checks an animal that is sickly, so it would die. It would die anyway. So, Mesukenes is different than a treifa. Treifa has some sort of defect. It's missing something. It has a hole in an organ. That's why it's going to die. The Mesukenes is going to die just because it's sickly. So the question is, if it died before the shechita, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says this animal is going to be kosher to eat. That's only because by the shechita it did some sort of convulsions that shows that its life was leaving then, and that it wasn't dead already from beforehand. We're afraid that it might have died before the end of the shechita. So if it does these convulsions, the farchas biyad v'regel, that the hand and the foot moved in and out by the shechita, so then it was alive by the at least by the shechita, and the shechita was effective. The Eliezer Medayim Zinka. The Eliezer says that it's enough if there's blood that's spurted around the neck area, not on the cut itself, but all around the skin around the shechita. Blood spurted it, and that means that it was alive, at least by the shechita. It was alive until the shechita, that the blood should be spurting out. Amar Reb Shimon says a sheichet balayla. No one shechs at night, so it's dark. Okay, doesn't sound like a good idea. But ulamacher hishkim matzik salam leim dam. So what I was telling you before about the neck is Reb Shimon's opinion. Zinka is when is to see it, but what happens is, Reb Shimon says that if you shechted at night, then in the morning see the ksalim. Ksalim literally means the walls. It's not talking about the walls of the house. It's talking about the walls of the it's talking about the walls of the neck of the animal. So then it's kshera, and it's going to be kosher. Why? Shazinka, because how the walls of the neck of the animal get so full of blood, because it spread it out. The Kamidas Rebbe Lezer, and that's exactly what Rebbe Lezer holds. Rebbe Lezer holds that it was considered alive if it was Zinka, if the blood spread it out. The Chachamim Maimer, the Chacham said, "Shetifar Chasei biyadei beregel, oyat shetichshech, shetich shechash, shetach shechash." It's a hard word to pronounce. Let me see. Shetachashkesh. It has to wag its tail. Shetachashkesh means to wag its tail. Shetachashkesh is nova. So either the Chachamim have a little bit of more of lenient opinion, and they say either it has convulsions with the arm or the leg, or it wags its tail. Now, this halacha is echad behem medaka v'echad behem megasas. Both a small animal or a larger animal has the same halacha. Behem medaka shepash the yoda of leich zira psula she'enel leisas nefesh b'lvad. By behem medaka, yarin, that if it moves its hand, it only goes in one direction. It moves it out by the shechita, but it doesn't move it back. You say that that's not considered a pirchos that's going to be satisfactory to tell us that it was alive throughout the whole shechita. Now, the expression is aleitzas nefesh b'lvad because that's just the soul leaving. Now, I'm not sure why that's the issue here. Because if the soul's leaving, that means it was alive before that, and everything should be good. Let's see what they say in the notes. not sure. Okay. Whatever the case is, the halacha, what the point that it's saying is that by a behemoth daka, spreading out its arm is not enough. Okay. When do we say that it has to do this by the shechita in order for it to be kosher? That's that's because the animal was questionable health. It was sickly. But if the animal was perfectly healthy, even if it doesn't have any of these simanim, it's still going to be perfect. It's going to be kosher. Even if it doesn't have any convulsions, it's still going to be kosher. There's no reason to believe that it died before the shechita. Gemara asks, Mr. Kenes, Mimai Deshaya. Okay, we're going to go through a whole Gemara here, back and forth, of how do we know that it's even kosher if it's sickly? So the Gemara says, the Gemara is suggesting that maybe it's considered, it goes under the category of a treifa, or maybe it goes under the category of an avela because it was going to die. And the only animals that you're allowed to eat are animals that are perfectly healthy. So this is my taste can die in the asir. The Gemara says 1 second. 1 second. Why would you think that it should be asir? We're saying that how do you know that it's mutter if it has convulsions? So who came up with any yisr? You have an animal that's alive that you shechted, it should be fine. There's no. You have a source that it should be asr because it says we'd have these are the animals that you can eat. Now the word chaya means that it's alive or it means a wild animal. But the Gemara learns from that chaya chol she'ena chaya leiseichal, that an animal that would continue to live, that means a healthy animal, that's the animal that you're allowed to eat. But if it's not going to live, this is a drasha that the Gemara is not going to live, you should eat it. This drasha the Gemara is suggesting, it's like making up a drasha and suggesting that maybe we should say that an animal that's going to die should not be mutter to eat even after it's shechted. It's already sickly. You can't eat it. We see it's a sickly animal. It's not going to live. So we're going to have this drasha. Only an animal that you're going to live, that's going to live, is what you're allowed to eat. Animal that's not going to live, you're not allowed to eat. So we have a source that you shouldn't be allowed to eat the mesukenes. In the pirkos, the convulsions that have at the shechita should not help. So how do we know now that it is mutter with the pirkos? Gemara says, "Midam rachmana nevela teichal." Since the Torah tells me that you're not allowed to eat a nevela. Nevela is a carcass, an animal that wasn't shechted, bichlal, but that would imply it's a kind of shayu. Now we're understanding over here that how did the animal die without the shechita? Because it was sickly. That means that when did it become aser? Once it died. I mean, sickly wasn't the problem. It means that if it was sick, an animal that was sickly, but you shechted it, that would be mutter. We're saying it's only aser after the death because it was died without shechita. So now we have our proof that a mesukenes, a regular sickly animal, is mutter, and the Pirchas shows us that it didn't die beforehand. So that would be the conclusion of the Gemara. The Gemara explains, if you would tell me that a sickly animal was usher even before it died, and if that drasha was correct, that was that only an animal that was going to live is an animal that you're allowed to shech eat, but an animal that was sickly, you're not allowed to shech. So then, so once it's usher already, once it's usher already while it was alive, you can't even shech it. So for sure, if it dies without shechita, so why would I have to tell me in the vela is usher? It was usher already beforehand. Must be that it wasn't usher beforehand. Really, while it was alive and sickly, it was perfectly fine. It's only when it dies without shechita that it's usher. This would be a good source to tell me that a mesukenes is really mutter. Excuse me. You just have to clarify that it didn't die before the end of the shechita. Mar says the Dilma Hainu nevela, hainu mesukenes. Where it suggests that when the Torah says the word nevela, that it's aser, maybe it doesn't mean only after it died. Maybe nevela, the carcass, is a name that we're going to use for an animal that was sickly. When it says you can't do that. You see, if you would do that, then you would end up saying that. Why do you have to tell the question that we had? Why do you have to tell me after it dies it's usher if it was already usher beforehand? We're saying no. We're saying that it's that we're not saying that after it dies it's usher. We're saying that it was usher beforehand. You don't think like that. I just need to clarify that 1 second. We were saying that we had a suggestion that maybe a sickly animal is usher. And that suggestion was from that only an animal that's going to live is going to be permissible. An animal that's not going to live is not permissible. So that was a suggestion that maybe a sickly animal should be usher. So that would be a negative command that was derived from a positive command. Because the positive command says this is the animal that you should eat. That implies that other animals you should not eat. If it's not going to live, you should not eat. Okay, so that's a negative, that the implication that's a negative that don't is coming out of that this is what you should, it's coming out of the positive. So we'll say that a negative that's derived from a positive, the Torah only listed as a positive, that would mean that it's considered a positive command. Then comes along Nevela and tells me that even while it's alive, it's also prohibited. That would be a negative. So we could say that we had already a positive from that you're not allowed to eat a sickly animal in Misukenes. Then we have the pasuk of Nevela that tells me you're also not allowed. No. What's it adding? It's adding a lav onto the asay. The Gemara says you can't say that because don't think like that. The pasuk says animal dies, an animal that you could eat. Someone that touches the carcass becomes tummy. Like this. It says, it's only called a nevela after it dies. So you can't tell me that a sickly animal goes under the category of nevela. Okay. Now what we're left with is the pshat that if a nevela, if a misakenis would be aser, then why do you have to tell me that a nevela is aser after it dies? It was already aser beforehand, while it was alive. It must be that it's permissible while it's alive. It's permissible to shecht it. And then everything in our Mishnah makes sense. That's why you need to have the pirkos to show me that it was alive throughout the shechita. The Gemara rejects this. The Gemara has a question on this. It says, really, I can tell you that every time an animal dies, it also has in it already the prohibition of that you weren't allowed to eat it while it was alive, even if you shechted it. Why? Because you have the positive command of that you can only eat an animal that would have continued to live. In other words, like this, maybe it's true that while it's alive, it's not considered a nevela. But while it's alive, it's still prohibited. So why do you have to prohibit something that was prohibited already? Because while it was alive, it was sickly. You weren't allowed to shecht it. Now that it dies, now we're adding on to Isser and Nevela. So we're saying no. While it was alive, it had a Isser Asay, a positive prohibition that tells me that this is not the animal that you should eat. The other animals what you should eat. That's considered an Asay. Then after it dies, and we add on it to Isser Nevela. And how do you know that there's even a potential for it to be permissible through shchita? You already said that zeisachaya and not and something that's einachaya misakenes would not be permissible. Gemara says now, gives another source. It says Ella. Ella means that we have to retract from something that we said earlier. Ella midam rachmana treifa leiseicha. We quote another pasuk. It says that you can't eat a treifa. Now, a treifa is also a sickly animal, but a treifa is an animal that actually has something that it's some sort of defect. It's not just sickly, like old. It's not just old and weak. This is there's something actually missing from the animal. Treifa, there's a problem with the lungs. There's a problem with the stomachs. There's something wrong. Some meninges are torn. It's missing a kidney, two kidneys actually. I think it's missing some major organ. Now, since the Torah tells me that a treifa you can't eat, that tells me because Mesukenes was also going to die. But if when do we say a treifa you can't eat? Treifa you can't eat would be that even if you shechted it, you can't eat it. Not if it just died. Even if you shechted it, you can't eat it. So so it goes like this. If you would tell me that any sickly animal you can't eat, which means any sickly animal you can't shech. Second, if you have a sickly animal, there's no defect in the animal, it's just sickly. So, and nevertheless, you can't shecht it. So would the Torah have to tell me that if it's so sickly that it even has a defect, it's even missing something? So of course it would be usher. The Gemara is going to give us the same answer. But the Gemara's question was that maybe we should, if I would learn that that you can only eat an animal that was going to continue to live. An animal that was not going to continue to live, you're not allowed to eat. So then why would you need to tell me that treifa, you're not allowed to eat? So I already know that you're not allowed to eat from the Zaysachaya. The Gemara says, "V'dilma hainu treifa hainu mesukenes." This is maybe it's the same thing. Balavar olav basei v'leisasei. We're going to do now exactly what we did with the nevela. So maybe the positive command that you have of Zaysachaya, that was only telling me the asay. And now it's coming to tell me the treifa was the loisasay. Gemara says in Cain, if that would be the case, and the vela, the kasav Rahman Alam, then why do we need the vela? You already gave me a negative prohibition with nevela. So Mami Chaim Kayala Lava say, if you already have a negative prohibition. We're saying now that Hainu Treif Hainu Mesukeres means that even while it's alive, you already have the prohibition that since it was going to die, you can't even do a shchit on it. What's the Lavana say? The say would be that Zaysachaya Shetechal, you can only eat an animal that was going to continue to live. And the negative prohibition, the lav, would be that don't eat a treifa. And both of those apply while the animal is alive, thinking that it's the same animal, the sickly animal and the treifa. The treifa would also be considered the sickly, that would go under the same category. And we already have now a positive and a negative for that. Now this would mess up what we were doing with our Mishnah. We're saying that if it would have convulsions, then it would be mutter. We're saying no. We're in this like devil's advocate by saying that really that Mishnah shouldn't really exist because because in the animal that's sickly, you're not allowed to shecht it anyway. Gemara says if that's the case, if you're going to accept that, then why does it have to say nevela? We already have both of these prohibitions while it was alive. You have to add on another prohibition after it dies. Gemara says another question. Maybe it's all the same. Maybe a nevela and a treifa and a misukenes is all the same, and all of them exist while the animal's alive. Well, that would tell us that the convulsions don't help, because an animal was also already while it was alive from zeisachaya. It's also while it's alive. So you can't shecht it because of a treifa. They'll go into the same category, and which we knew. And a nevela, we're saying that it's already considered a nevela even while it was alive, because it was going to die. Umar says Ella. Ella again means we're going to reject the answer and we're going to suggest a new answer. Nehacha. The chaylev nevela, the chaylev treifa, yasel chal malach v'achol eisechlo. It says that the fat of a nevela and the fat of a treifa, you're allowed to do work with the fat. In other words, you're not allowed to eat it, but you're allowed to have benefits from it. So why do you have to tell me this? You know that you're not allowed to eat fat, even if from a kosher animal, even from an animal that was shechted. Now you're telling me that the fat of a nevela, that you're not allowed to eat it. You're not allowed to eat any fat. So I'm retired. It's coming to tell me that the prohibition of nevela takes effect on the isser of chaylev. Which means that now, if someone does eat it, he gets double lashes. He gets both. It's not only was it chaylev, but it was also a nevela, also treif. Okay. But how does that prove anything? And if you wanted to tell me that a treifa is a misukenes, which means that when an animal is sickly, it has the same halacha as a treifa, it means that you won't be allowed to shecht it. Then lichtev rachmana chaylev nevela yasel chal malacha v'chaylev treifa leisechlua. If that's the case, then all it needed to tell me was that by the nevela you can have anah. It's tahar. It doesn't. I could have thought that when an animal dies, it gives off impurity. I could have thought that not only the flesh gives off impurity, but also the fat gives off impurity. Say no, the fat is not considered part of the animal in this instance. We say that the fat actually does not give off impurity. It would tell me that when it comes to the fat of the nevela, it does not give off impurity. In the treifa, you don't have to, and the fat of the treifa you can't eat. To teach me that the misukenes, the sickly animal, would have a prohibition on the fat as well, which means that it was a double prohibition. Bana amina, and I would understand from this, ma mechayim, if while it's alive, there's already a prohibition on the fat. So asi is a treifa, chayale is a chaylev, lachamisim mibai. If I would say that there's a prohibition on the fat already while it's alive, and in general, I'm not allowed to eat fat. Now you're telling me that I can't eat the fat of a treifa. And what's the treifa? Misukenes. So which means that I have two prohibitions on the fat. One is because it's in general, it's fat. Another prohibition is that it's treifa, it was sickly, it was going to die. It wasn't really a treifa, but it's not that a defect, but we're saying that a treifa and a misukenes are the same thing. So now I would have a double prohibition on chaylev, and that prohibition would be while it's alive, while the animal's alive. It means that shechting the animal would not help in any way for both of those. So then, lachamisim mibai, then after the animal dies, you have to tell me that it was already aser, that there's a iser nevel on it. I already have the iser treif, and I have the iser chaylev. So why does it have to tell me v'achol eisechlua? Does it have to tell me that you're not allowed to eat it? I already have two prohibitions on it. Ella, midakasav rachmana nevela. The fact that Torah writes nevela mechlal the treifa lav hainu misukenes. It must be that we never really had a prohibition on the chaylev. The chaylev was only usher because of chaylev. The forbidden fat was only usher because it was forbidden fat, not because it was sickly. Now it's coming to teach me, when it says that you're not allowed to eat it, it's coming to tell me that only after it dies you're not allowed to eat it, which means that beforehand, a sickly animal would not have any prohibition on it. And it means that the treifa aspect is only when it's really a treifa. That means it's a physical defect, not just sickly. A regular sickly animal would only be prohibited if it died and there was no if we shechted it and there were no convulsions. But if there were convulsions, we'd say that it died then, and it was permissible. Maskefla Mar Baravashi has a question. Maybe we could say that a treifan and mesukenes is actually the same thing, not the way we were saying. That a treifan and mesukenes would be an animal with a defect and an animal that was sickly is exactly the same thing, and both of them are prohibited, even while the animal is alive, even if it's shechted. With the kamret, and if that's the case, in nevela the kas of rachmana lamli, so then why does it have to say nevela by the chaylev? Already know that it was aser, because a treifa and a sickly animal and sukenes are the same thing. So we say the Gemara says maybe what it needs to say it lahach nevela d'leyasim mikerech mesukenes vechidam mishasa gistra. Maybe there is a case of a nevela that wasn't. We were assuming like this: that how does the animal become a nevela? Because it was sickly and it died. But there's a possibility that the animal was perfectly healthy and it died. How'd that happen? Because someone just cut the animal in half. So, and then and he killed it, and that would be a nevela. If that's the case, so then a nevela is not automatically a mesukenes. A nevela is an animal that was never. That wasn't even sickly. My answers this question. It says, "Hasam nami efshad lehabi mesukenes portim kamblif sakruba." That's the case. Then, as you were cutting the animal in half, it was a mesukenes for a moment before it actually died. So therefore, every Yasin nevela already started when it was alive. And if we would say, if a mesukenes and a nevela is the same thing, then could have understood that if a treifa, the chaylev of treifa is already aser while it was alive, then I would have understood that the chaylev of nevela, then the chaylev of nevela should also be aser. So why does it need to say nevela to tell me that really a treifa and a mesukenes is not the same thing? Biba Yasema can have another source to tell me that a mesukenes, an animal that's sickly, is actually permissible if it's shechted. It says like this: in Cain, lema, if you would tell me that a mesukenes, an animal that was sickly, is prohibited, then lema chaylev nevela treifa. Let it just say that the fat of an nevela and a treifa you can't eat, and I would understand that the prohibition of nevela and treifa are applicable even to the fat, which means that there's a double prohibition on the fat. Chaylev lamli. Why does it have to say the word chaylev twice? It says chaylev nevela, chaylev treifa. It could have just said chaylev nevela u treifa. It says, why is it coming to tell me chaylev twice? Zui shein chel b'chalak m'sara. V'yishacher shechel b'chalak m'sara. Over here, we say that the chaylev is the same as the animal. That both of them you're not allowed to eat. However, there is another case where the chelba is chalak min basara, that only the chaylev is aser, but the rest of the animal is going to be mutter. Ve'ezu zu, which one is this? Mesukenes. Ve'ezu, which one is this? Zu mesukenes. This would be an animal that was sickly, that the fat you're not allowed to eat, but the rest of the meat you are allowed to eat. Okay. Another source to say that a mesukenes is mutter if it's shechted and it has convulsions, and we can say that the source is from Yecheskel. We have another source. it says like this. Va'imar aha Hashem Elikim hini nafshi lemituma unevelu trefa leachalti min urai vadata leba befi basar pigel. Cheskel saying that Hashem, I never contaminated my body. I didn't eat an aveler trefa since my youth until now. And I never had in my mouth, never came into my mouth flesh of pickle. What does it mean? That my soul is never became impure. I never had improper thoughts during the day, which would cause me to become a carry at night, to have the tum of a carry, to have a mission. That's Yecheskel talking. I never ate nevela treifa. I never ate an animal that was that was so close to dying that we had to say shechte. Kais is the Aramaic word for shechte. I never ate an animal that was sick. Even though it was shechted, I never ate that from an animal like that. Never ate from an animal that that a chacham had to rule on, which means that it had a shaila. Reb Nosson says, I never ate from an animal that the gifts that were given to the kohen weren't given. Which means the zraya, the front leg, the cheek, and the keva. I never ate from an animal like that. Now, okay, so now that's Yecheskel talking. Now, if you would say that a animal that's sickly is actually permissible to eat, so Yecheskel is telling us that even though he was allowed to eat an animal that was sickly after it was shechted, but he wouldn't do it anyway. So he's telling us how frum he is. But if you tell me that it was actually prohibited, so what's the big deal that Yecheskel didn't do an aveira if it was asa? It must be that really an animal that's old, that's elderly, that's dying, that's sickly, you're allowed to shecht it as long as it's not a treif, as long as it doesn't have a major defect. Now the Gemara says, what's the case of a misukenes, an animal that's sickly? Amar Rav Yudam says, he says that any animal that can stand up on its feet, but it's not able to stand, it like collapses, so that would be a misukenes. And we're saying that a misukenes is actually mutter, as long as it has the convulsions during the shechita. Even if it's able to eat wood chips, it means it has strength in its mouth, but nevertheless it can't stand up, it's still considered misukenes. Remember, Cheskel says that even if it can chew on beams, if it can chew on a beam, that would also be a misukenes if it can't stand on its feet. Surah Masnehachi, this is the way it was taught in Surah. Surah is the city where that Rav comes from. Pumpadisa Masnehachi. In Pumpadisa, where Rabbi Yehuda came from, they taught it a little differently. Hechidam misukenes. But there, we say, what's the misukenes? What's a sickly animal? Rabbi Yehuda himself says that even if it's able to eat wood chips, but it can't stand up, then that was considered misukenes, and you need those special halachas to make it kosher. Rami Bar Yecheskel that even if it can eat beams, shows that it has strength, but the fact is in its mouth it has strength. It doesn't have strength in its teeth. It doesn't have strength in its legs. So that would be a misukenes. Okay. Let's go a little further. Shmuel finds the students of Rav. He comes across them. Amalahu, so he says to the students, "Mayam Rav misukenes. Tell me a teaching of Rav about an animal that was sick." Amalei hachi Rav. You tell him that Rav said the following: Goya, if the animal gives a cry, scream by the time of shechita, bitila rei, and it loses its bowels, the kishka ba'azna, and it moves its ear. Reza pirkus. That's considered convulsions, which shows us that the animal is still alive. Time of the shechita. Amalahu. Shmuel says to the Talmidim of Rav, it's fichli la'aba la'zuzayune. Rav wants the animal during the shechita to move its ear in order for it to be kosher. That's very extreme. I say, anything that a dead animal wouldn't do, that's already considered that it was alive. Mind you, what are you referring to? So what are those things that would happen naturally by a shechita? Ravanan says that Shmuel himself told me, the arm of the animal was folded and it opened it up. That's davar shamisa. That would be something natural by the shechita. How do we know that it was more than that to make sure that it was still alive at the end? That's if it was an open pshuta v'kafafa. If it was open and then it closed it, then that's dvarim she'ena misa. So that the misa doesn't do this. Gemara says, "My kamashmalan, my kamashmalan. What are you coming to teach me, Tanina? We already learned this in the Mishnah. This is a small animal that it opened up its arm by the shechita, but it didn't close it. But that's not enough. That's psula. That's only hatzas nefesh. But if it does bring it back, then it's ksheira. That's exactly what we said. The convulsions that are required after the by a shechita, by a mesukenes. So we already have a Mishnah that says this. What do we need Shmuel to say it? The Gemara says, "Even mas nisan have amina dafka the kaifel pashtava the kaifel." The Mishnah would have understood that it has to if it was the arm was folded, it opened it up, and then it closed. It's had to do two actions. So pshuta b'kafafta, but if it was open and then it closed it, then I would say not. Mashmalan, so Shmuel says that even if it just closed it, that's enough. Even one action, one moving inward, that itself is enough of a pirkus. One asks, what about we said before, Rav spoke about that if it loses its bowels by the shechita, or if it gives a cry by the shechita, that's considered a pirkus. That's enough. Meisvei, the Gemara has a question. Rabbi Meir used to say, Rabbi says about Rabbi Meir, they're friends really. Rabbi Meir says that the crying by the shechita is not a pirkus, it's not a convulsion. Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yesi, that's Rabbi Yesi's son, says in the name of Rabbi Yesi, so this is a problem because Rav says that both of those are a pirkus. So first of all, kasha gua, crying on the crying is the first problem because Reb Meir says that Goya is not pirkus and Rav says that it is. And kasha rei and Rabbi Yesi, Rabbi Yesi says, name Rabbi Yesi, that losing the bowels is not a pirkus. And Rav said that it is. Gemara says Goya like kasha hadavikala damikala. There's two types of crying. One is with a thick voice. One is with a thin voice. That's if it would be a thin voice, and that won't be considered pirkus. But if it's a thick voice, then that would be. Reya like kasha also with losing the bowels is not a problem either because kambishay says kambimatreses. Depends if it's just dripping out or if it's like spurting out. Rav says that it's considered pirkus because it was spurting out. Okay. Holding by Amar Rav Chizda, and we're on Lamed Ches of Amud Aleph in the middle of the page. That's where we'll continue tomorrow. Okay, have a good day.